Have you ever met someone who seemed incredibly kind, quiet, and understanding? Yet somehow, every conversation left you feeling guilty, confused, or emotionally exhausted. They never yelled. They never openly insulted you. They rarely acted like the center of attention. In fact, everyone around them thought they were humble, sensitive, and even selfless. But behind that calm exterior was something much harder to recognize. A covert narcissist doesn't manipulate with obvious arrogance. They manipulate with subtlety. That's exactly why they're so dangerous. Most people can spot an arrogant narcissist from a mile away. The loud ego, the constant need for attention, the endless bragging. But covert narcissists wear a completely different mask. They hide behind kindness, vulnerability, and quiet suffering. And because of that, people often stay trapped in these relationships for years before realizing what's happening. Today you're going to learn how to recognize a covert narcissist in just 60 seconds. And once you see these signs, you'll never unsee them again. Here's the first clue. They constantly play the victim. No matter what happens, life is always unfair to them. Their coworkers don't appreciate them. Their family misunderstands them. Their friends betray them. Their partners are impossible to please. At first this sounds believable because everyone goes through difficult moments. But after a while, you notice something strange. Every story has the same ending. They're always the innocent one. Everyone else is the problem. Nothing is ever their responsibility. They don't seek solutions. They seek sympathy. And the more empathy you give them, the more dependent you become on protecting their emotions. Before you realize it, you've started carrying emotional weight that never belonged to you. The second sign is even more subtle. They make you question yourself without directly attacking you. Instead of saying, "You're wrong," they'll say, "Maybe you're remembering it differently." Instead of admitting they hurt you, they'll reply, "I think you're being a little too sensitive." Notice what's happening. They aren't denying your feelings outright, they're gently planting doubt inside your mind. Over time, this creates confusion. You start replaying conversations in your head. You wonder if you overreacted. You apologize for things that weren't your fault. This quiet manipulation has a name: emotional gaslighting. And covert narcissists become experts at it because they rarely appear aggressive while doing it. Now pay attention to this question. How do they react when something good happens to you? This answer reveals almost everything. Healthy people celebrate your success. They feel happy when you grow. A covert narcissist does something different. They smile, but the smile never reaches their eyes. They immediately change the subject. They remind you of someone who's doing even better, or they casually mention their own struggles to shift the attention back to themselves. It's subtle enough that you might ignore it the first few times. But eventually, every achievement you share somehow becomes about them. Instead of feeling supported, you leave feeling strangely deflated. That's not an accident. Your confidence threatens the emotional control they quietly rely on. Here's another sign almost nobody talks about. They crave admiration, but they pretend they don't. Instead of saying, "Look how amazing I am," they'll sigh and say, "I guess nobody notices everything I do." Instead of asking for compliments directly, they'll criticize themselves until someone reassures them. This is called fishing for validation. It's indirect, but incredibly effective. People rush to comfort them. They receive the attention they wanted without appearing arrogant. That's why covert narcissism is so difficult to recognize. The need for admiration is still there. It's simply hidden behind insecurity instead of confidence. Let's make this even simpler. Imagine two actors performing the same role. One loudly demands applause, the other whispers, "I don't think anyone appreciates me." Different performances, same objective. Both want attention, both want validation. The only difference is the strategy. One uses dominance, the other uses vulnerability. That's why so many people mistake covert narcissists for deeply wounded souls who simply need more love. In reality, empathy often becomes the very tool they use to keep others emotionally attached. Here's another powerful clue. Boundaries make them uncomfortable. The moment you start saying no, something changes. Maybe they don't explode with anger, instead they become distant. They act disappointed. They make subtle comments designed to trigger guilt. Suddenly you're wondering if setting a healthy boundary somehow made you selfish. That's exactly the emotional trap. They don't always punish you directly. They punish you emotionally. And because the punishment is so quiet, you end up breaking your own boundaries just to restore peace. Now ask yourself another important question. Do you constantly feel responsible for managing their emotions? If they're upset, do you immediately assume it's your job to fix it? If they're silent, do you become anxious? If they're disappointed, do you apologize before even knowing why? Healthy relationships don't create that constant pressure. But covert narcissists slowly train people around them to become emotional caretakers. It's not through obvious demands. It's through subtle conditioning repeated over months or even years. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing manipulation always looks aggressive. It doesn't. Sometimes manipulation looks like sadness. Sometimes it sounds like disappointment. Sometimes it hides inside silence. That's why intelligent, caring, and emotionally aware people often become the easiest targets. They naturally want to help. They naturally assume the best in others, and covert narcissists know exactly how to take advantage of that compassion without making it obvious. Think about this. Have you ever left a conversation feeling emotionally drained without understanding why? You weren't arguing. Nobody yelled. Nothing dramatic happened, yet somehow you felt exhausted. That's your intuition, trying to tell you something your mind hasn't fully processed yet. Emotional exhaustion is often one of the earliest warning signs that someone is quietly manipulating your emotions. Your body notices long before your logic does. There's also another hidden pattern. They rarely give genuine apologies. Instead of saying "I was wrong," they'll say, "I'm sorry you feel that way." See the difference? The words sound polite, but responsibility completely disappears. Real accountability requires ownership. A covert narcissist avoids ownership because admitting fault threatens the carefully crafted image they want others to believe. They'd rather protect that image than repair the relationship. Here's something even more surprising. Many covert narcissists genuinely believe they're the misunderstood hero in every story. That's what makes their behavior so convincing. They've built an identity where they're permanently overlooked, permanently underappreciated, permanently wronged. That belief allows them to justify manipulation without seeing themselves as manipulative. And that's exactly why confronting them rarely works the way you expect. Instead of reflecting on their actions, they'll often find a way to become the victim of the confrontation itself. The good news is that once you recognize these patterns, they lose much of their power. Awareness changes everything. When you stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your peace. When you stop chasing approval from someone who constantly moves the finish line, you reclaim your confidence. And when you stop carrying emotional burdens that were never yours to begin with, you finally create space for healthier relationships, built on respect instead of manipulation. The hardest part about dealing with a covert narcissist is that they rarely look like the villain. In movies, toxic people are obvious. They're loud, controlling, and intimidating. Real life is different. A covert narcissist often appears thoughtful, quiet, intelligent, and emotionally deep. They may even be the person everyone goes to for advice. Friends describe them as so nice. Coworkers call them misunderstood. Family members insist they've always had a difficult life. That's what makes the experience so isolating. You start wondering if you're the only one seeing this hidden side of them. And because nobody else notices it, you begin questioning your own reality. This is exactly where their influence becomes strongest. They don't need everyone to believe them. They only need you to stop believing yourself. Once that happens, every decision becomes harder, every conversation becomes confusing, and every emotion feels unreliable. That's not love. That's psychological control disguised as emotional complexity. One of the clearest signs appears when you start succeeding. Maybe you get promoted. Maybe your business grows. Maybe you become healthier, more confident, or happier. Instead of celebrating your progress, they become strangely uncomfortable. They may not criticize you directly. Instead, they'll make small comments that slowly chip away at your excitement. Don't get your hopes up. That probably won't last. You're changing. I miss the old you. At first, these statements seem harmless, but together, they create an invisible pattern. Every step forward you take somehow feels like you're leaving them behind. And that's exactly what they fear. Your independence reduces their influence. The stronger you become, the less emotional control they have. So they don't attack your success head-on. They quietly convince you that success comes with guilt. Another powerful pattern is emotional inconsistency. Some days they shower you with appreciation. Other days they become cold for reasons you can't explain. Nothing changed. You didn't do anything different. Yet suddenly their energy shifts. This unpredictability keeps you emotionally hooked. You spend enormous amounts of time trying to figure out what happened. Was it something you said, something you forgot, something you missed? The truth is, confusion becomes part of the relationship itself. Human brains naturally search for patterns. When affection becomes unpredictable, your mind works even harder to earn it back. That's why people often become addicted to unhealthy relationships. They're not addicted to love, they're addicted to uncertainty mixed with occasional rewards. Let's talk about guilt. Healthy guilt appears when you've genuinely hurt someone. Toxic guilt appears when you've simply protected yourself. A covert narcissist blurs that line until you can't tell the difference anymore. You feel guilty for saying no, guilty for spending time with friends, guilty for pursuing your own dreams, guilty for resting, guilty for disagreeing. Eventually, guilt becomes your default emotional state, and when someone can make you feel guilty for simply existing as yourself, they've gained extraordinary influence over your choices. That's why boundaries feel so uncomfortable at first. Not because they're wrong, but because you've been conditioned to associate self-respect with selfishness. Here's another question worth asking. Do they seem deeply empathetic until your emotions require their attention? They may spend hours talking about pain, healing, kindness, and emotional intelligence. But when you're the one struggling, something changes. Suddenly your feelings are minimized, your problems become inconvenient, your needs interrupt their narrative. Genuine empathy flows both directions. A covert narcissist often performs empathy when it earns admiration, but withdraws it when true emotional responsibility is required. That's a difference most people don't notice until much later. Something else happens over time. You slowly stop talking about yourself. Not because you want to, but because every conversation eventually circles back to them. You mention a stressful day. They remind you theirs was worse. You share an achievement. They tell a story about themselves. Somehow, you end up comforting them instead. Without realizing it, you've become the audience in someone else's emotional performance. Healthy conversations create mutual connection. Toxic conversations create emotional imbalance. One person constantly gives, the other constantly receives. If you've recognized several of these signs, don't panic. The goal isn't to label every difficult person as a covert narcissist. Human beings are complicated. Everyone can act insecure. Everyone can become defensive. Everyone makes mistakes. The difference lies in the pattern. Healthy people reflect, they apologize, they grow, they accept feedback even when it's uncomfortable. A covert narcissist repeats the same emotional cycle over and over because protecting their fragile self-image matters more than building healthy relationships. That's why isolated incidents don't tell the full story. Consistent patterns do. So what should you do if someone in your life fits this description? First, trust your observations. If you constantly feel confused, anxious, guilty, or emotionally drained around one specific person, don't ignore those signals. Your emotions exist for a reason. Second, stop over-explaining yourself. People who genuinely care about you don't require endless defenses for every decision you make. Third, strengthen your boundaries. Not because you're trying to punish anyone, but because boundaries reveal the health of every relationship. Respectful people adapt. Manipulative people resist. Finally, remember that you cannot heal someone who refuses to recognize their own behavior. Compassion is important, but compassion without boundaries often becomes self-sacrifice. Here's something that can completely change the way you see relationships. The healthiest people in your life won't make you feel like you're constantly walking through an emotional maze. They won't leave you replaying conversations at 3 a.m. They won't force you to decode hidden meanings behind every text message, every silence, or every facial expression. Healthy relationships create clarity. Toxic relationships create confusion. That's one of the simplest tests you can use, and here's the 60-second summary you can remember forever. If someone always plays the victim, quietly makes you doubt yourself, struggles to celebrate your success, seeks constant validation through subtle insecurity, ignores your boundaries, makes you responsible for their emotions, leaves you feeling chronically guilty, avoids real accountability, and repeatedly drains your emotional energy while appearing innocent to everyone else, you're very likely dealing with a covert narcissist. Not every quiet person is manipulative. Not every insecure person is narcissistic. But when these behaviors consistently appear together, they form a pattern that's too important to ignore. The greatest protection against manipulation isn't becoming colder, it's becoming more aware. Awareness allows her to separate empathy from exploitation, kindness from control, vulnerability from performance. The more clearly you understand these patterns, the less power they have over your life. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is this: love should bring peace more often than confusion. Respect should feel consistent. Trust should grow naturally. And the people who truly care about you won't need you to shrink so they can feel bigger. If this video helped you recognize behaviors you've never been able to explain before, don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who has been silently questioning their own reality for years. And if you want to learn more about psychology, manipulation, emotional intelligence, and the hidden patterns that shape human behavior, make sure you subscribe and join us for the next video. The more you understand people, the harder it becomes for anyone to control you without your awareness. Until next time, stay curious, trust your instincts, and remember, the strongest defense against manipulation is seeing it clearly before it takes control of your life.